Brad, I just took a look at your way too early 2024 rankings, and I got to ask, man, what the heck are we doing with Travis Kelce all the way down at, what was it, 53 overall?
53. 53.
My goodness, man. Is it the Taylor Swift thing? You think they're going to get married this offseason and he's going to have to deal with like the new marriage or something next year? What's going on, man?
Oh my gosh. Here's the thing is Travis Kelce, he was best ball value rating number 2 tight end this year. But if we look at the second half of the season from week 9 on, among qualified tight ends, there were 13 tight ends with, I think, 40 or more targets from week 9 on. And Travis Kelce ranked 9 of 13th in PFF receiving grade and 8th out of 13th in yards per route run among those tight ends. So he wasn't even top 5 in the second half of the season. And then we just experienced bus game after bus game after bus game. We're going to need to see more from Travis Kelce here in the playoffs for us to be more confident to draft him, right? I mean, we're going to have to think about what positional difference he makes. Sam Laporta was just a little bit better than him this year overall in the best ball value rating. But if you're going to draft a difference-making tight end and stacking him with Mahomes, who let you down this year, like it's a losing proposition to draft Travis Kelce, even in round 2 or round 3 in 2024, not only for those reasons of he's fallen off, but we know the reason he's fallen off. It's not Taylor Swift, as much as we like to think that he's going to retire and set off into the sunset with his podcast and Taylor Swift, and they're going to make beautiful babies that, conquer the world like King and Queen of America. But no, like it's Travis Kelce. He's 34 years old, and that's what it's near the end for him. So, Jake, I'm not worried about, Travis Kelce's ranking. I think he's going to be a solid round 5 draft pick, but I think you're going to get that kind of value with him and Mahomes here in 2024, given how poorly Mahomes performed this year. There's going to be a lot of name value, which is why I don't think Kelce or Mahomes fall outside of round 5. But yeah, they were bad this year and deserve to be falling this far.
Okay, so I'm going to push back here a little bit on 2 fronts, mainly that so we compare Kelce to Sam Laporta's season this year, and I think that the name value alone is probably going to keep Kelce at the latest in round 3. But the statistical argument I would make is that Travis Kelce only scored 5 touchdowns this year. 5 touchdowns. That's the fewest he scored since 2019. And that's way below expectation on his 93 receptions this season. I think that regression is coming for Travis Kelce. I know it's risky to bet on an older player to bounce back, but that's exactly what I think I'm going to do in 2024. I have Travis Kelce ranked as my 21st overall player.
21st overall player. You're going to be getting a lot of Travis Kelce, I think. Mid round 2. So he was going, I mean, and in the FFPC streets, sometimes he was going as the 101 this past season. And Mahomes, that was an easy click. Like if you got him at 101, you were going to get Mahomes in round 2 or the 301. But, getting Kelce there could still set you up for a pretty serious 0 RB build. You go your wide receiver in round 1, you still get Kelce in round 2, but then I just love all of the value of these wide receivers and running backs. And in particular, when we get into round 2 and talking about round 2 rankings, I love the running backs that I expect to be falling there into round 2 or even late round 1. So I think I'd rather take shots on upside swings and high spike week players that don't have the warning signs that we saw here at the end of 2023. So as we go back and forth, and this is part of the ranking summit Jacob and I are going to be doing overall, there's going to be positional ranking summits that I'll bring others on as well for, but Jake and I are going to be diving into these larger view draft board type of ranking summits where we're going to look at round 1, round 2, round 3 players etc. tonight. And we're going to dive into maybe some nitty gritty, maybe some questions, big questions that we have for each of these players. Make sure you guys are following both of us on Twitter at FF Stalder, at 16 Fabian Jacob. And we're going to give you some great content throughout the offseason, just like talking about Travis Kelce and whether he is a round 2 pick, maybe round 3 pick, or a round 5 pick for this season. Drafts are going to be starting up here, Jake. I'm not going to be able to draft. We can't wait. I've already started planning. Like, all right, I see FFPC has dropped some dates already. You can sign up on FFPC, but Underdog is yet to drop theirs. Drafters is yet to drop theirs. There are a few other places. We're lying in wait for those 2024 drafts to get into full swing. I look back and I think the first draft I did for 2023 was back in December of 2022. So, I've been hungry for the last couple of weeks. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I remember last year, I think the way too early best ball contests on Underdog opened, I think, as early as November. And this year, I think they've put a lot more energy into the playoff best ball contests, which are a fun game in their own right. But I've always been a year-to-year player. So I share your excitement. Absolutely.
Well, we'll get into round 1. We already talked about Travis Kelce, round 2 through 5. There's going to be some large disagreements and some small disagreements. In round 1, between Jacob and I, we both see Christian McCaffrey and Tyreek Hill as the top 2 picks, clearly in tier 1 for myself. Jake, any words you want to add about McCaffrey and Tyreek Hill being in that tier 1 of 102 and 101 of our expectation for the 2024 drafts, or are there any other players that you think might sneak into the top 2 considerations?
I think Justin Jefferson could maybe crack his way into that top tier, depending on what happens with his quarterback situation, whether Kirk Cousins comes back and is looking healthy. But I think right now, if we were drafting today, there's a clear top 2 there between McCaffrey and Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, McCaffrey this year, an 18.7 best ball value rating. For those who are unfamiliar with the best ball value rating, essentially that is the amount of points out of 150 that a particular player contributes. So why is 150 points an important threshold? That is the average amount of points that the season-long winner scores every week in the Best Ball Mania 3 and Best Ball Mania 4 seasons. So we've looked over the last couple of years, and you need 150 points if you want to win your week, if you want to be the top dog. And so 150 points in reverse engineering, like 18.7, that's more than 10%. That's a significant chunk. So comparing Christian McCaffrey at 18.7, even David Montgomery, who had a very strong year this year, he was top 8 in best ball value rating, was only at 11. So you got almost double what David Montgomery gave you versus what Christian McCaffrey did. Just to give you some idea of the importance of this best ball value rating and why it is important for us to say, hey, like, these players at certain places are values based on ADP and what kind of player am I going to get in these rounds? And that's why I may be a little bit higher or lower on players compared to the industry, because I'm looking at these values and what kind of return am I going to get for these players. So there's positional value as well factored in, because as we know, especially for the underdog streets, you can start 3 wide receivers and a flex versus you can only start 1 tight end and maybe the flex. But we know that tight ends are not going to contribute as often, sans those couple high-end tight ends relative to one of the wide receivers or one of the running backs. So, there's positional value factored in as well into the best ball value rating. But McCaffrey finished at an 18.7. Tyreek Hill finished at a 17 flat. So these are players who contributed very significantly to your best ball teams this past year, and we expect to do so next year. For me at 3, and this is where we start to differ a little bit, Jacob. For me at 3, it's Breece Hall. Hall, I mean, he one of the first plays of the game in week 18, 50-yard touchdown. And it looks like he's fully healed from that ACL tear from last year. For me, I think Hall can get into that 1.01 conversation based on the pass catching. He had 29 touches in this game in week 18, something ridiculous. I maybe it was more, but I think Breece Hall, as outside of Christian McCaffrey, I think Breece Hall has the clearest path to RB1 overall in half point or full point.
Yeah, for me, it's just a question of preference between Breece and the wide receivers I have ahead of him. I have Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, and Amon-Ra St. Brown going ahead of Breece, who I have at 7th overall. And so on formats like Underdog, where you have to start 3 wide receivers, I want to lock down one of those elite guys with one of my early picks. I am absolutely a fan of Breece Hall. Had a ton of him this past season. But I do think that with Aaron Rodgers returning to full health, hopefully by the time next August rolls around, that he's probably not going to be as check down happy as a Trevor Siemian or a Zach Wilson, who really couldn't operate a downfield passing attack. I think Aaron Rodgers will be distributing the ball around a bit more to Garrett Wilson. And hopefully, for the sake of that offense, they're adding some weapons, maybe at tight end in the draft, maybe a Brock Bowers. But we will see. So it's a marginal difference. We're splitting hairs here in the first round. But yeah, I absolutely love Breece. I just have him behind those wide receivers.
You mentioned Garrett Wilson. We can dive a little bit deeper into, round 3, where I have Garrett Wilson as my wide receiver, or my overall 32, player 32 in the draft. So mid round 3 and near the end of round 3, which is a discount from where we were getting him last year. And Jake, you have him at 12, which is close to, if not a little bit ahead of where his ADP was in September. And so I think that my concerns with Garrett Wilson lie twofold. One is that we saw, him operate with just a massive amount of targets, and the quarterback situation could be significantly better, and we expect it to be so. It has to be improved. He was wide receiver 47 in best ball value rating this year, despite being one of the top target earners in the NFL. We expect the spike weeks to improve. That's why I have him not at wide receiver 47, but like at wide receiver 20 or 24, somewhere around there. But my concerns are that the bottom could very easily fall off for Aaron Rodgers. Like that it's within the range of outcomes that he is just not the same. And that's kind of the hedge that I'm playing. I think that Garrett Wilson, extremely talented player, extraordinary target earner, manufactures his own yards. But the problem for me is that this Jets offense, has a lot of ways to win. And Garrett Wilson certainly is one of them. But Breece Hall, we've discussed earlier, and maybe that's kind of the yin and yang discussion here. But I would be happy to get Garrett Wilson in round 3, but early round 2 or even round 1, I think that's paying a premium for what we're hoping Aaron Rodgers to return to MVP form.
Sure. And I may be undervaluing that risk as far as Aaron Rodgers falling off. My concerns for him and for Kirk Cousins are a little bit less because they're not mobile quarterbacks. They, it's maybe once Aaron Rodgers was known for his mobility, but not so much anymore. And so I'm not as concerned that Aaron Rodgers might fall off after this injury. But he could just be falling off in general. The last time we saw him in 2022, he was very disappointing, especially for fantasy football. So I totally can see that argument. But for me, I was a fader of Garrett Wilson at this price tag last year, mostly because his rookie year was impressive, no doubt, in terms of the usage. But I wasn't sure if he could build on it, especially as compared to other rookies from that class, like Chris Olave. So it was less that I didn't like Garrett Wilson and more that I thought he was just a little bit rich. But he came out this year. He posted a 30% target share. He was wide receiver 8 in expected points per game per PFF. So I think that the usage is going to be there. I think that Aaron Rodgers is going to improve the efficiency, and hopefully he can convert that top 10 wide receiver usage into top 10 wide receiver fantasy points.
Here's to hoping. Okay, Jake, I've got 2 questions for you still about Garrett Wilson. Since you're on the hot seat, you've got him in round 1 of your rankings. What more do the Jets need to do to improve their offensive line? And how concerned are you that they're going to make those changes for 2024? We'll start with that question.
Honestly, I'm not a super close purveyor of offensive line play. So I don't necessarily know. I know they've had struggles with Mekhi Becton, both when he's on the field and with him just staying on the field. So my understanding from what I've seen from other sources and Jets fans is that tackle is a big concern for them. So, maybe at 10, they take a Joe Alt if he's still there. But, I don't know how exactly they plan to address it, but I think simply the introduction of Aaron Rodgers, the leadership and the direction that he can provide as far as identifying pressures and putting his offensive line in a position to succeed is going to make that offensive line look much better than they did behind, say, a Trevor Siemian or Zach Wilson, So I think Aaron Rodgers' presence and his acumen in terms of just identifying pressures and defensive fronts is going to be a big help in itself.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the elevation from Siemian or Zach Wilson. I mean, the rumors even today are that they're going to try to trade Zach Wilson. Good luck getting
for anything. A ham sandwich.
Right. Exactly. Okay. What percentage, this is the second question, what percentage would you give to the likelihood of the Jets trading for Davante Adams?
5%. I don't know. I never really bought the rumors that he was particularly unhappy. I mean, he was obviously unhappy with Josh McDaniels, but I don't think that the Jets and Joe Douglas are going to be pulling that kind of move to get Davante Adams off of the Raiders.
Yeah, I think it's unlikely as well, given, especially if Antonio Pierce is still the head coach for the Vegas Raiders. I think Adams does stick around. If they find another head coach, though, like a Harbaugh, we could see Davante Adams find his way out. That head coaching situation could prove interesting. Okay, we'll continue onward into the rest of the first round. There seems to be a pretty strong tier of wide receivers. You mentioned Justin Jefferson earlier in the podcast. CD Lamb, Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, who has had another massive day here in week 18. I think it's pretty close and a lot closer than what people initially have. I think I'm going to get a lot of Amon-Ra. You even have him at 6. I have him at 7. I felt like, I've got him pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
Amon-Ra, is there a pathway for him to be the wide receiver 1 in fantasy? Is that too spicy?
It's tough because it depends for me a lot on what Ben Johnson decides to do. That made this exercise for me, ranking Lions, it was just very challenging because of that uncertainty. I think that, Amon-Ra and Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery would all take a bit of a hit if Ben Johnson decides to leave. But I do think that Amon-Ra St. Brown is the kind of target earner and the profile that can post a Cooper Cup like season, where he's just a slot machine and he's basically unguardable when you put a safety or a linebacker on him. Now, the market in the past has generally been lower on Amon-Ra St. Brown pretty much for that reason, that he's more of a PPR guy, that he racks up receptions, but he doesn't have a super high weekly ceiling. And that's probably a fair argument as far as, he's never going to do a CeeDee Lamb 16 catches for 230 yards kind of game, right? That's just not how his usage, his role would allow him to perform. But he can absolutely give you 10 for 100 and a touchdown every other week, So I think Amon-Ra is just a very underrated player. Maybe in, certain best ball tournament contests, maybe he is a little bit less valuable for that, the lack of that 100th percentile outcome. But that's not going to stop me from taking him in the middle of round 1.
No, he is a staple in the mid rounds. You also touched on the Detroit Lions rest of teams. So Jahmyr Gibbs, who was also falling in our first round here, I have him at 9. You have him at 10 overall. So Jahmyr Gibbs here as, what is this, the running back 4? Ahead of Achane, ahead of Bijan Robinson, at least as of right now. I mean, rumors are swirling, right, about Arthur Smith, a certain very angry head coach for the Atlanta Falcons. But very spicy. But Jahmyr Gibbs here, he's scored 10 touchdowns this year, even missed a few games. David Montgomery had double-digit scores as well. There is, and we did see Monty miss some games. If it's not Breece Hall, it's Jahmyr Gibbs who is pathway to RB1 overall. Yeah. Like, this is a player whose pass catching upside is there. He looks and moves like Kamara on the field. And the way the Lions are utilizing him and Amon-Ra and Laporta is pretty even around the goal line. And this is a high scoring team. So I think you and I both are justified in drafting him at the end of round 1. Are there any of the wide receivers that you would take him over?
Out of that tier of
Amon-Ra,
no, I couldn't get there on Gibbs. And honestly, I feel like 10 is a bit aggressive, especially if David Montgomery's still there. Maybe Ben Johnson's leaving. But the talent is so hard to deny. The explosiveness, the receiving ability. I might be a little concerned if Detroit decides to add maybe another receiving option that could draw some targets away from Jahmyr Gibbs. But realistically, I think they have bigger problems on the other side of the ball that they'll have to address. So for me, Jahmyr Gibbs, he's in that next tier down. But I have him as a top 5 running back. So I think he's going to do some big things next year.
All right, Jake, this is where you're going to have to roast me. You have DJ Moore as a mid round 2 selection at pick 18. I have him at 10th overall. Why do you hate DJ Moore?
Well, it's not so much that I hate DJ Moore. I just think the range of outcomes here, as far as, the Bears either keep Fields, which, DJ Moore has thrived this year, right? I mean, he's the points per game wide receiver 10, which I have in the middle of the second round. I have him ranked at wide receiver 11, which I feel like is appropriate. So you either have Justin Fields running it back another year, with DJ Moore, or you have Caleb Williams coming in as a rookie, a generational rookie, no doubt. But for me, it's just very hard to see a whole lot of improvement for DJ Moore, especially with his usage. He was uh, not a wide receiver one in expected points per game. He was wide receiver. He was in a tie for wide receiver 20 in expected fantasy points per game. So, I mean, he's obviously a talented player. He outperformed his expected points per game, his usage by a solid 3 points per game. But it's, between those two options with Fields, who hasn't shown much improvement through his first several years in the league, or Caleb Williams, a rookie, as good as he is expected to be as a rookie, we haven't really seen a lot of successful fantasy wide receiver, or at least high end wide receivers producing with rookie quarterbacks. So I'm tempering my expectations, but I don't think that I necessarily hate DJ Moore so much as you just really love DJ Moore.
Well, this is where you got to flip it on me, Jake. You got to say, Bradley, why do you have an obscene love for DJ Moore?
Yeah, I have to avert my eyes.
Yes. Oh, yes. We got to go get a room, I suppose. That's what. Geez, oh man. But DJ Moore, he's the overall player 10. I do have him ranked behind Amon-Ra, but in the same tier as Puka Nacua and AJ Brown. If we look at the best ball value rating, DJ Moore was a top 6 wide receiver this year in terms of rate of top 5 weeks. And all of them came with Justin Fields. Now, a lot of those games where he was the wide receiver 50, wide receiver 51, wide receiver 58, wide receiver 34, etc., were all with our boy, Tyson Bagent. And it was because Justin Fields got hurt. Now, if you're saying, well, Bradley, we got to bake in a little bit of Justin Fields could get hurt, fine. We want to, sure. But the spike weeks we were getting from DJ Moore, when he hit, he was giving us 20% of the time plus these elite level games. 21% top 5 rate is the likes of Mike Evans, is just below Keenan Allen, just below Justin Jefferson. That was ahead of AJ Brown this year, was ahead of Debo, ahead of Amon-Ra, ahead of Puka, ahead of Devontae Adams. So DJ Moore was showing us these massive games. And then he was, where's my best ball value rating overall on him? DJ Moore ranks as wide receiver 10 in best ball value rating, but I'm not going to have him behind Keenan Allen next year. I'm not going to have him behind Mike Evans this year, this in 2024. And I think it's in the same tier as AJ Brown and Puka Nacua. Now you're like, well, Caleb Williams, maybe he's a step back, but I think the pushback will be Caleb Williams is not going to pull the ball out of the possibility of throwing. Like, he's not going to tuck and run as much as Justin Fields would. So there's going to be more pass attempts in that type of offense for the Chicago Bears, even if they're going to be slightly downgraded, even if there are some adjustment issues. If we believe that Caleb Williams is going to be the number 1 overall pick, or maybe 102, or wherever he goes, or if it's going to be Drake May, or if we know what Justin Fields can do with DJ Moore, right? We've got top 10, possibly top 5 wide receiver if he's healthy the full season. But I think that the upside can swing even higher with a player who gives you more passing volume in games that can be more competitive, and will look down the field more often. And it's kind of disappointing, Jake, like, to take an aside. Justin Fields was one of the most accurate downfield passers when he was in college at Ohio State. And, that hasn't translated to the NFL as well. But if we're going to get that type of player with DJ Moore on an improved Bears offense, like, I want a lot of DJ Moore this year.
And that's completely fair. knowing myself and my process, I feel like once I sit down and do my projections, I'm going to look at DJ Moore's touchdown rate from this season, his 70.6% catch rate at his ADOT, which I forget it off the top of my head, but I know he's more of a downfield threat generally, and to have a catch rate that high, I just know that I'm going to project some regression there. So I feel like I'm just trying to do my best to hold the line, keeping him at wide receiver 11. But yeah, it's not necessarily that I think Caleb Williams would be a downgrade from Justin Fields, because I don't. I think he would be just a straight up upgrade. So I guess maybe I am just biased towards the history of rookie quarterbacks, because the general history of that trend is not necessarily Caleb Williams in every case. But yeah, it'll be a very fun draft season for Chicago for sure.
Okay, so here's a question I have for you, Jake.
Absolutely.
You are a little bit lower than I am on Devon Achane. Achane, I have at 13th overall in my rankings. We're now seeping into round 2. You have him at 19, so a little bit, into the mid of a little back end, mid round 2, which is fine. We can have differing opinions on Devon Achane. That's kind of getting a little nitpicky, but why do you instead, though, have Raheem Mostert all the way down at 93 when I have him at just like the end of round 4, beginning of round 5? If you're lower on Achane, why are you even lower on Raheem Mostert? Is it just regression, or is there something else that you expect to happen?
Well, so for starters here, Brad, I do have to hold your feet to the fire on this one, because having both Dolphins running backs, I know they've performed masterfully for fantasy this year. But having 2 running backs from the same team ranked inside the top 50, I think is a little bit suspect. It'll be very hard for both of them to sustain the efficiency that we've seen allow them to eat. Maybe not. Maybe Mike McDaniels is just that guy and everything's going to play out similarly as it did this year, but I wouldn't bet on it. And so for when I was going through thinking about, like I said, this is vibes based for me. So this reminds me very much of a 2021 Javonte Williams versus Melvin Gordon type of debate, where we had Javonte going as that 2-3 turn pick, and we had Melvin Gordon going much later, even though they were coming off of just this 50-50 even time split. And for me, I was fortunately bailed out by the Javonte injury, unfortunately for him, but that, and then Melvin Gordon ended up getting cut and nobody won. But to make that point, to bring that home, is basically to say that I think Raheem Mostert at his age, as the sort of descending slope, and Achane's on his ascending arc, I think there may still be some risk that Miami does bring in another running back, again, due to Mostert's age. So I think there's a little bit of uncertainty there for Mostert. I'd be happy to move him up if we get to August and it's just Achane and Mostert again. But for now, if I was drafting today, I'd have a lot more confidence in Achane than I would in Mostert. Though not quite so much confidence as you seem to have in Achane, mainly just because I'm a stickler for size and durability. And Achane did get nicked up a decent amount this year, so I have some concerns there for him as opposed to a Jonathan Taylor or a Breece Hall or Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah, I hear you on the size. Achane showed off his electric speed this year, and I think that's what makes this Miami team so dynamic. Is they've got speed everywhere, and you don't know as a defense, where they're going to go with it. I mean, obviously Tyreek Hill is going to be the number one read, but Jalen Waddle also got an obscene amount of target share this year. Raheem Mostert, the reason why I had him, like, Mostert was running back 3 this year in terms of best ball value rating. Obviously a league winner in his own right, over 20 touchdowns this season. But I agree with you. I don't think that, this is going to be sustainable. That's why I don't have him, in the first round, in the second round. We have our major concerns about Raheem Mostert and his age. You mentioned that. And Mostert got nicked up, and he has a history of injuries for sure. And Achane as well. These are guys who were seldom healthy at the same time. But when they were still both very fantasy viable. And I want pieces of this Miami backfield, because we've seen, and this was a mistake not a mistake. I wouldn't call it a mistake, because I was invested more than the market in the Miami Dolphins backfield. I had like 13% Jeff Wilson. I had 13% Mostert and like 13% Achane. And I was just split. I had between, every draft, I probably had 40%, combined. I one out of every 3 drafts, I had one of those running backs. But
I was all in on the Jeff Wilson side of that.
Right, but we knew something was going to hit, and we knew something was going to hit, and unfortunately, it just wasn't Jeff Wilson. But we knew that it was going to be an absolute factory for fantasy points. So that's what I'm like putting my chips in on, is offenses that we definitely know are going to manufacture fantasy points. And if they do bring in another running back, so be it. But in round 5, like, Raheem Mostert isn't going to crush you, if you miss on a Raheem Mostert. I mean, we missed on Christian Watson this past year in round 3, round 4, and both Best Ball Mania winners had him on their teams. So yes, structural reasons and blah, blah, blah. But like, you can afford to take a hit in some of these rounds. You can afford to take a loss. And I'd rather take shots on these highly efficient, proven track record, fantasy point factory teams, and especially ones that are willing to run the ball when they get close to the line of scrimmage, when they get to close to the end zone. So give me Mostert, give me Achane above wherever they're going to be. Although, there's been some sharps in the industry who are like, Achane at the 1-2 turn, Achane, and I'm like, oh man, that's put a little spice on it. But we'll find out if that's where some of these, as the tides turn throughout the off season. It would not surprise me if Achane becomes a first round pick by the time we get into September.
It's possible, but I won't have any. I just can't do it.
We'll keep it going. Bijan Robinson, I have him at 14. You have him at 17. So we both believe he's a second round pick. But Arthur Smith, if he's gone, like, we know what Bijan can do. He could be the running back 1 overall as well. Like, there are pathways for him to be the best in fantasy, and especially with a coach that could use him appropriately and around the goal line. I mean, we've seen, imagine if Ben Johnson goes to the Falcons. You've got Kyle Pitts.
That'd be pretty nice.
You've got Drake London in the Amon-Ra role. And then you've got Bijan Robinson and the Jahmyr Gibbs plus Monty role. I mean, maybe it's Algier in the Monty role. Fine. I don't care. Then give me all the Algier in that case too. But fading Bijan was the smart thing to do in 2023. Is it going to be a smart thing to fade Bijan Robinson in 2024?
It depends on his price. I think that, if the market adjusts and capitulates to Arthur Smith, then, Bijan at this price tag would be acceptable. I think, though, or at least I have a sneaking suspicion that people will overreact if Arthur Smith is gone, and bump Bijan a little bit higher than I'd like. My ranking at 17th overall, RB7, is basically, to myself, I'm saying there's a probably coin flip, a 50-50 chance that Arthur Smith is still there. So I'd maybe bump him up a couple of spots up to where I have Jonathan Taylor and Travis Etienne at that 1-2 turn. But if he starts climbing up into that middle of the first round where, Amon Ra and Brees and Kyron are for me, then I think I'll be out on Bijan at that price.
Ooh, okay. What about Bijan Robinson? If Arthur Smith leaves, do you think the market would go crazy enough for him to be the 101 overall?
There's a lot of other factors that would play into it too, right? Like, what did they do at their quarterback situation? Is it Justin Fields and Bijan Robinson without Arthur Smith and Ben Johnson at quarterback? Like that. There are paths to it where I could see Bijan being introduced to that conversation. But it would just be so hard for me to get there after what we saw this season. Bijan flashed at times, but he was kind of inconsistent. So, I mean, a lot of that was due to usage.
Can't hold the illness game against him, right, Jake?
Yeah, no, you can't hold the illness game against him, despite Arthur Smith giving him a carry in the fourth quarter of that game for whatever reason. But yeah, no, I don't know. It would take a lot to get him to that 101 conversation for me.
Okay. Yeah, Bijan Robinson ended up being the running back 21 this year in terms of best ball value rating going into week 18. He obviously had a big week 18, so that's going to be updated a little bit, but it's not going to shift it too much. A player that had a big week 18 as well with Jonathan Taylor, over 180 rushing yards against the Texans. I had Bijan Robinson ranked as, not Bijan, I had Jonathan Taylor ranked at 17, you at 14. I think I am a little bit low on Jonathan Taylor. I think he does deserve to be moved up a little bit more, probably, to 15 or so. I'm willing to move him up a little bit. But my concerns for Jonathan Taylor are it's going to be Anthony Richardson season. And I have a lot of love, Jacob, for Anthony Richardson. Richardson, you and I actually see very similarly. End of round 4, beginning of round 5, like right at that 4 or 5 turn. And Richardson is my quarterback 4. I can't tell. Is he your quarterback 4 as well?
Quarterback 4 for me as well.
So I think that this is the right spot, and I'm going to love drafting a ton of Anthony Richardson. Do you think the market is going to have him that high, or is it just both of us are really big in on Anthony Richardson?
I think the market's going to come close to that price. I don't know if they'll go completely bananas, but we've seen how Justin Fields was drafted last year. We've seen how Trey Lance has been drafted in the past with small samples of good play. And we saw Anthony Richardson be the quarterback 1 on a per snap basis this past year. So, he still managed to be the quarterback 14 in points per game, despite playing less than 40% of the snaps in 2 of his games. And the 2 complete games he did play, he let me see here how he did. But we expect Steichen to continue to push the pace. And I think Jonathan Taylor, there is some concern there that Richardson is going to take away from him at the goal line. But yeah, we saw 21.9, 17.7, and 29.6 points in, I think, the 17-point game Richardson left early. Yeah, the 6 for 10 for 60. So, he's got that elite upside. And if he gets another offseason to work in the system, get that those practice reps in as he recovers from his injury. If you see people saying this offseason that Anthony Richardson is injury prone, or that, because he runs, he's going to get hurt more. I mean, obviously, every time you have the ball in your hands, there's a chance for injury. but I would fade the heck out of any injury prone narrative. The guy is built like a tank. He runs like a Ferrari. So, there's really no argument for me to have Anthony Richardson any lower than he currently is. And I think the market is very likely to agree with that.
I think if anything, it could turn into one of those. I don't think Michael Pittman will fall this far, but maybe that will force Anthony Richardson to move up. I could see Pittman going at the end of the 3, and then Anthony Richardson going at the start of 4. And
Yep.
then you see at the 3-4 turn, just like Justin Fields, but Fields and DJ Moore was at the 4-5 turn. And I think that, we saw a massive stack boom weeks from both of them together. And that's the type of thing we could see from Pittman and Anthony Richardson in a similar sense of Fields. Only Anthony Richardson came out of the gate and was scoring fantasy points. Fields, it took forever. Now, Matt Nagy, asterisk till the cows come home. But I think that Anthony Richardson and Michael Pittman at the 3-4 turn is what we're going to end up seeing sometime this summer, barring any unforeseen injuries to either of those players.
Yep, and I'd still be taking them there.
I want my Anthony Richardson shares for sure. All right, we'll keep chipping away at round 2. If you guys like the content and found this helpful so far, smash the subscribe button here at the Fantasy Football Plus Network. Jacob Fabian and I crushing the ranking summit so far. Jake, we kind of hit on Saquon Barkley a little bit, but let's dig a little bit deeper on Saquon. I have him at 18 as a mid round 2 running back. You have him all the way down at 34, the end of the 3rd round. Saquon Barkley has not been like himself. He's dealt with injuries that have been pretty disastrous for a few of his seasons. But this year, going into week 18, running back 10 in terms of best ball value rating, he had 11% of his weeks as an RB1, 15% of his weeks as an RB2, and 30% of his weeks as a flex play. So he was most of the time, 57% of the time, making it into your best ball lineups. He was worthy of being startable. What concerns do you have about him being ranked so far below where I have him? I have mid round 2. You have him almost twice my ranking. So let's suss it out here a little, Jake. What concerns do you have for Saquon going into 2024?
Sure. Mainly, I am really concerned that he's cooked. That's about it. He's a pending free agent, and I'm not sure that if he goes somewhere other than New York, he'll have anywhere close to the same role. He's still a very good receiver. He always has been. So he'll have that in his bag. I don't think he's going to get, left on the curb like a Leonard Fournette or Ezekiel Elliott. But among 54 running backs who had at least 75 carries this season, Saquon ranked 45th in PFF's elusiveness rating. So he's really just not making people miss like he used to be able to. He's had those injuries, and I think those have definitely took their toll on him. But just to give you some reference on who ranks in that range, who also had over 75 carries, we're talking guys like Ezekiel Elliott, Joe Mixon, Alvin Kamara, Ty Chandler, Gus Edwards, like guys that really just don't have a lot of juice or anything really left in the tank. And we'll probably get into Alvin Kamara here in a bit because I'm also much lower than you on him, but for very much the same reason. But yeah, for me, it's the situational concerns for Saquon as far as will he go somewhere that gives him the same volume or, even similar volume, or is he going to, maybe go to a Miami and replace a Raheem Mostert and have an opportunity to thrive there. I think having him towards the late 3rd still, respects his receiving ability and the potential for him to land somewhere where he does have a good role. But there's a lot of risk for Saquon.
Yeah, there is some, the floor for Saquon is scary because you take away 80% of his runs are just garbage, trash. Like he's not a good runner on 80% of his runs, but on the 20% of his runs where he's good, he'll just explode. And that's just been the Saquon formula for the last few years. I mean, throughout his career, he's never been a great between the tackles guy, but when he gets out into space, he can burst through his. And you're right. He's running back 45 in true yards per carry this year, running back 42 in yards per touch, running back 47 yards created per touch. Like these are outside of what running back 3 in terms of efficiency, but running back 14 in breakaway run rate. And so when he gets just one more crease, he can make that big play. And then I think you're right. This does tie into how I also view Alvin Kamara. And so Barkley and Kamara I have Barkley higher because he's younger. That's just the reality. Like Barkley I have at mid round 2, Kamara at the 2-3 turn, but they are both high end running back target share earners this year. Saquon Barkley 16.2% target share, and that was 5th among running backs. And so, wherever he lands, he's going to be a target earner. And that's what he's been throughout his career, regardless of who's been at quarterback for the Giants and regardless of who's been the head coach for the Giants. He's been a target earner. But same thing with Kamara. No matter who's been the coach or the quarterback, Kamara has been earning targets, and 19.3% target share this year for Kamara. I mean, I sent out a tweet earlier today, and I said, Alvin Kamara to the Broncos in 2024. Who says no? I think that's a great idea. I think Kamara to the Broncos would be a great idea. Give me Sean Payton reunion. Talk about it. Because once again, Kamara, he's putting up the exact same metrics as Saquon in terms of efficiency. 43rd in true yards per carry, 45th in juke rate, 33rd in yards per touch, 25th in yards created per touch. Like at least that was a little bit better. But Kamara's not going to break it off with anyone. So it's the target share that his role is not just as running back. It's as dump off. It's as an extra screen guy. It's as a player who's going to get PPR touches. And so for someone who's at the, you can take your swings on players in round 2 and round 3, but with running backs who earn those types of target shares, at least the floor is a lot safer for them. And because at this point you've missed out on some of the big home run swingers, of your Jonathan Taylors, your Bijans, your Travis Etiennes, your Achans at this point.
Yeah, fair. And sorry, I was caught up in
it's okay.
In my sheets
here. Aren't we all? Sometimes we're caught in the sheets.
Yeah, sometimes you get lost in the sheets.
Lost in the sheets.
No, that's part of my larger overall process as far as my approach to the running back position is that I want to take those higher upside swings. Like, for example, I have James Cook ahead of Saquon Barkley. So, like, to me, James Cook has a similar receiving profile tied to a good offense. So there's just that little micro edge that just Saquon keeps sliding down behind some other guys for me.
Yeah. I don't know why this one is showing up this way. I have James Cook at 39. You have him at 30. So, like, within a round of each other. I don't think we're too far off on James Cook. But is that why you're also that much lower on Austin Eckler? It's just Alvin Kamara, like completely fallen off the train? Or is it like my concern is that the offense for the Chargers just fell apart with all the injuries, and that Eckler was still dealing with injuries and things just aren't reported, and or at least he's not willing to admit at that point. But the efficiency metrics for Eckler were certainly not there. You have him at 77. I have him at 41. I think that Eckler profiles as your discount Kamara, your discount Saquon. The efficiency metrics are disastrous, but if you can get some targets, I think you can get him better than 77th. Yeah,
it's possible depending where he ends up. Right, he's also a pending free agent, so it's no guarantee that he remains with the Chargers or somewhere that he will have that opportunity to be more than just a change of pace back. And I think if he falls into that sort of change of pace back role somewhere, which he can absolutely do, and I think a team would absolutely be willing to pay him to do. But just with what we've seen from the running back free agency market recently and what we saw from Eckler on the field this past year, I just can't help but feel like every front office in the NFL saw him limping down the field at 13 miles an hour in that Packers game. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if Austin Eckler is in that Ezekiel Elliott, Leonard Fournette, waiting on a call category this offseason. Now, do I think that's what's going to happen? No, because I still have him ranked in my top 100 players. But I do think that's a serious risk. And so I've tried to bake that into his price here.
All right. Well, we've hit in on a lot of players through the first 2-ish rounds. I was before in the pre-show meeting, I was like, Jake, we can go round 4, round 5, and we can just see where we're going. But we got through probably about 2 rounds here. There were some players we omitted from those rankings, but we did dip into a few players in the later rounds as well. We probably got through 2.5 rounds here. This has been a lot of fun, Jake. And I think this is an important exercise to go through and discuss at this point, especially without having ADPs available to us. And even when we do have ADPs, like we're going to be the ones who are making the ADPs. We're going to be the ones, the degenerates who are in the best ball streets, here in a couple of weeks, creating the average draft position. So, Jake, this has been a lot of fun, and we're going to try to get, Jake's rankings up on the website onto fantasyfootballplusnetwork.com and my rankings as well there. So you can see where we have them. And then of course, we're going to compare those to where some of the ADPs are for whatever sites we can get our hands on in terms of the expert consensus rankings or the average draft positions for the different tournaments that we'll have available. Any last words, Jake, before we sign off for tonight?
It's been a pleasure, Brad, as always. Really looking forward to once those ADPs, or rather once the draft rooms open so we can make the ADPs and, just draft using our own ranks so that the ADPs line up with them and we can just look very, very smart. So
call us the ADP sculptors.
Yeah, exactly. The Michelangelos of ADP.
Yes. All right. On behalf of Jake, I'm Bradley. Until next time, good luck in the fantasy football streets, everyone.